The humid evening air clung to the streets of Riverbend, Louisiana, carrying the faint scent of magnolia and the distant, rhythmic croak of bullfrogs along Bayou Desire. 17-year-old Lila Montgomery had just left her shift at the small diner her mother had insisted she take over the summer. The neon sign buzzed faintly behind her as she stepped onto the cracked sidewalk. Her flip phone buzzed once, a message from her best friend confirming their plan to meet at the corner for a quick walk to catch the last bus. Lila typed a reply, pressing send, and slipped the device into her worn denim pocket. She adjusted her satchel containing a notebook filled with sketches and photography prints, her private world of art and aspiration, against her shoulder and started walking toward the bus stop. It was 8:17 p.m. and the sun had just vanished below the horizon, leaving a streak of pink across the humid sky. The streets were quieter than usual, the warm evening drawing most of the town's residents inside their homes. Lila's steps echoed lightly against the cracked pavement as she turned toward the intersection. A car rolled slowly behind her, its headlights painting her shadow long across the asphalt. She glanced back but only caught a blurry silhouette. Nothing seemed unusual. She quickened her pace slightly, not wanting to be late, weaving past the familiar murals that local artists had painted on brick walls, depicting Riverbend's history and the Mississippi River that gave life to the town. Then, without warning, she disappeared. No struggle, no scream, nothing but absence where a vibrant teenage girl had just walked moments before. The small town, usually calm and gossipy but safe in its own way, suddenly faced a void that none of its residents could comprehend. For 19 years, that warm night in August 2003 remained frozen in memory. Lila's mother, Julia Montgomery, a petite woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes, never stopped searching for her daughter. Posters with Lila's smiling face lined the windows of the diner, the bus stops, and even the local library. Church vigils were held monthly, and the Riverbend police conducted periodic sweeps of the bayou and surrounding woods, but leads were scarce, hope faded, and the trail went cold. What no one realized in 2003 was that the answer had been hiding in plain sight, waiting for technology and persistence to bring it to light nearly 2 decades later. Lila Montgomery had been a girl who noticed details others overlooked. At 17, she stood at 56, with tightly curled black hair often pinned with colorful clips, her almond-shaped eyes always scanning, recording, and imagining. She had dreams beyond Riverbend, a scholarship to study fine arts in New Orleans or perhaps photography in Chicago, a life that would take her beyond the confines of the small Louisiana town. Her bedroom reflected her passions, sketchbooks stacked in neat piles, a camera she carried everywhere, journals filled with thoughts, ideas, and quiet observations of the world around her. Her friends remembered her as witty, fierce, and empathetic. Lila had a laugh that filled a room and a stare that made people feel seen. She volunteered at the local community center, helped her younger brother with homework, and often stayed late at the diner not for the paycheck, but to connect with the regulars, listening to their stories as she refilled coffee cups. That Thursday night in August began like any other. Julia remembered waking at 6:15 a.m. to the hum of the coffee pot. Lila had showered and prepared for work in her usual meticulous fashion. Breakfast was quick, a slice of toast with peach preserves and a glass of milk, before she kissed her mother goodbye and left for the diner by 7:05. School records confirmed she had attended classes that morning, though she had skipped her final period to work an extra shift at the diner. Her coworkers recalled her cheerful presence, laughing with customers and cleaning tables, unaware of the darkness that would descend hours later. At 7:52 p.m., security footage from the diner captured Lila leaving for the bus stop, carrying a small paper bag with leftover pie and her sketchbook tucked under her arm. She waved to Mr. Boone, the diner's owner, and started down the narrow, lamplit street. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. The Riverbend Police Department launched an immediate search. Officers canvassed streets, alleys, and the banks of the nearby bayou. Volunteers joined with flashlights, combing fields and abandoned lots. Boats patrolled the water, dogs tracked scents, and helicopters from the state police hovered above, their lights cutting through the darkness. By midnight, no trace of Lila had been found. All that remained were her bag, untouched except for the pie, resting under a streetlight. Her sketchbook, closed and undisturbed, lay on top. Her phone was nowhere to be found. Witnesses were few and contradictory. An elderly neighbor, Mrs. Delacroix, claimed to see a tall man in a dark sedan parked near the corner at approximately 8:20 p.m. Another driver, passing the same intersection, reported seeing a young girl walking briskly but no vehicle near her. The conflicting statements only deepened the mystery. The investigation quickly turned cold, though the Montgomery family never stopped hopping. For years, Lila's disappearance remained one of Riverbend's most haunting mysteries. Julia kept her daughter's room untouched, her sketches neatly stacked, the walls adorned with photographs Lila had taken of the town and its people. Every August 21st, the town held a small candlelight vigil near the diner, honoring the girl who had vanished without a trace. Friends and neighbors would gather, lighting candles, sharing memories, and quietly praying for answers. In 2019, the first real breakthrough emerged. Nearly 16 years later, the Louisiana State Police had invested in a cold case forensic unit, focusing on unsolved cases from the early 2000s. Their attention turned to Riverbend's oldest files, preserved meticulously in cardboard boxes and metal cabinets. Among the evidence, a single cigarette butt collected near the bus stop where Lila had been last seen became the key. Initially ignored due to the degradation of the sample, advances in DNA extraction now made it possible to analyze what had once been considered useless. The analysis revealed a partial DNA profile of an unknown male, not in the state or national databases, but a promising lead nonetheless. Using forensic genealogy, detectives built a family tree in reverse, tracing potential relatives of the unknown profile. Months of painstaking research narrowed the possibilities to two families in the Riverbend area. Covert collection of discarded items, soda cans, cigarette butts, and other everyday items, finally yielded a full DNA match. The man was local, familiar to many, and entirely unsuspected. Franklin Duval, a 52-year-old high school janitor, a man who had been in Lila's orbit without anyone realizing the danger he posed. The revelation sent shockwaves through Riverbend. Duval had attended community meetings, volunteered at school events, and appeared in photographs with students, sometimes standing next to the Montgomery family. For nearly 2 decades, he had woven himself into the fabric of the town, hiding in plain sight. The betrayal was not just about Lila, but the trust every resident had placed in a man they considered harmless. As authorities prepared to act, detectives reviewed old case files, re-interviewed witnesses, and uncovered details that had been overlooked. Franklin Duval's presence near the diner and bus stop had been noted, yet dismissed, overshadowed by more obvious leads at the time. A photograph from a 2003 school event captured him unusually close to Lila, his arm near her shoulder in what seemed an innocent pose, but now, with context, took on a sinister undertone. The stage was set for an arrest that would not only resolve the case, but expose the vulnerabilities of a community that had lived under the shadow of uncertainty for 19 years. Every step forward was a delicate balance between bringing justice and confronting the emotional trauma that had quietly persisted for 2 decades. Meanwhile, Julia Montgomery, now in her early 60s, had refused to let time erode her hope. She maintained the vigil at the diner every year, spoke at community events about missing persons, and quietly coordinated with local law enforcement to keep the memory of her daughter alive. The impending arrest was a mixture of relief and dread. Finally, there would be answers, but facing the man who had destroyed her daughter's life, while remembering the boy who once cleaned classrooms and greeted her kindly, would be almost unbearable. The night before the arrest, Riverbend felt unusually still. Fireflies dotted the edges of the streets, and the humid air pressed down on the town as if holding its breath. Julia lit a candle in Lila's memory, whispering softly, "We're coming for you, baby girl. Soon, they'll know the truth." Her voice trembled, carrying both fear and determination. As the investigation moved into its final hours, the pieces were all coming together. The DNA, the genealogy, the overlooked details from 2003, and the patterns of behavior that, in hindsight, painted a clear picture of predation and deceit. The town of Riverbend, unknowingly, was on the brink of closure, a moment they had been waiting for since that warm August night nearly 2 decades ago. Detectives prepared the warrant quietly, careful to ensure no leaks, no premature alerts. Franklin Duval's daily routines were observed, confirming that he would be home alone the following morning. Every step was measured, every decision deliberate. The culmination of years of patience, technology, and persistence was about to unfold. Riverbend would awaken not just to justice, but to the emotional reckoning of having lived alongside a hidden threat for almost 20 years. The events about to unfold would test the community's resilience, the Montgomery family's strength, and confront every person who had believed in the safety of the familiar streets and friendly faces. And in the quiet, with a single candle flickering in memory, Lila Montgomery's presence was felt more strongly than ever, as if she had been guiding the detectives toward the truth all along, waiting for science, persistence, and courage to finally catch up to the darkness that had taken her from them. The morning of the arrest began quietly, almost deceptively so. Riverbend stirred under a thick, humid dawn as the first light reflected off the bayou, casting golden streaks across the water. Birds called out, oblivious to the tension that had gripped the town for decades. Julia Montgomery, unable to sleep, had already made her way to the diner. She sat at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a mug of steaming coffee, staring at the empty streets. The familiar hum of the neon sign above the entrance buzzed as she recalled every detail of that August evening nearly 20 years ago. Every memory was sharp, as though frozen in time, from the sound of Lila's footsteps to the flicker of the streetlight where her daughter had vanished. Detectives arrived quietly, a small team armed with evidence, warrants, and the certainty that today would mark the end of a long, painful chapter. They had spent months building a case, reviewing old reports, revisiting witness statements, and preparing for every possible scenario. Franklin Duval's house, a modest 2-story frame at the edge of town, had become the focal point of their operation. Surveillance confirmed he followed his usual morning routine: coffee at precisely 6:30 a.m., newspaper on the porch at 7:00 a.m., allowing officers to position themselves strategically without alerting him. At 8:15 a.m., the team moved. Plainclothes officers approached from the front and rear, while uniformed backup waited a block away. The air was thick with anticipation. Years of frustration, uncertainty, and heartbreak were about to collide with justice. The first knock at the door was firm and deliberate. "Louisiana State Police. We have a warrant for your arrest," a detective called. Silence answered them. Another knock, louder this time, and the door slowly creaked open. Duval stood there, eyes wide, a mug of coffee trembling in his hands. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. He didn't resist as officers stepped forward, placing handcuffs around his wrists. His expression flickered between confusion and realization, though whether he understood the weight of the moment was uncertain. Behind him, the house was quiet, impeccably neat, betraying no hint of the darkness that had haunted Riverbend for so long. As officers led him away, neighbors gathered, some peeking from windows, others cautiously stepping outside. Murmurs ran through the crowd: shock, disbelief, and finally relief. Inside the police station, interrogation began. Duval's demeanor shifted from feigned ignorance to defensive evasions, and finally to a hesitant admission. He recounted fragments, details that seemed innocuous at first, but under scrutiny revealed premeditation and manipulation. He had known Lila for years, observed her routines, and waited for the perfect opportunity. He insisted he hadn't intended for things to go as far as they had, but his words rang hollow against the evidence, the DNA, the genealogy, and the witness testimonies that, in retrospect, had been overlooked. Julia Montgomery was present as the confession unfolded, seated quietly in a separate observation room. Her hands were tightly clasped, her jaw set, eyes focused, and yet behind the strength was a storm of emotion, grief, anger, and an unshakable longing for the daughter she had lost. Every word Duval spoke pierced her, but it also validated 2 decades of vigilance, hope, and resilience. At long last, the truth was emerging from the shadows. Riverbend itself experienced a tumultuous mix of emotions. Friends, neighbors, and former classmates of Lila gathered at the diner, sharing memories and supporting one another. For years, there had been whispers of suspicion, fleeting rumors of potential suspects, and a nagging unease about the unknown. The arrest confirmed what many had feared but could never articulate. A trusted member of the community had been hiding a dark secret. Detectives meticulously reconstructed the events of that night in 2003. According to their findings, Duval had followed Lila from the diner, taking advantage of the empty streets and fading light. Witnesses had noticed his dark sedan, the shadowy figure inside, but no one could have predicted the danger lurking within. The forensic evidence, combined with his later confession, provided a chilling narrative. He had forced Lila into his vehicle and transported her to an abandoned shed near the outskirts of town. There, he admitted to holding her briefly before her death, leaving her body concealed in a location only he knew. The revelation was harrowing. The town had lived under the weight of uncertainty for 19 years, and now the full scope of the crime was revealed. Julia Montgomery, while devastated, felt an undeniable sense of closure. The mystery that had stolen her daughter's presence was finally exposed. Lila's life, though tragically short, was acknowledged, honored, and remembered with a clarity that had been absent for nearly 2 decades. The media descended on Riverbend, reporting the story with headlines that highlighted both shock and relief. Small town shaken as killer of teenager found after 19 years, read one newspaper. Television crews captured the emotions of residents, focusing on the Montgomery family's resilience and the detectives' perseverance. While the coverage brought unwanted attention, it also reinforced the importance of persistence, technology, and community support in solving cold cases. But the twists were far from over. While the confession provided critical details, investigators discovered discrepancies in the timeline and certain inconsistencies that hinted at the possibility of accomplices. Duval insisted he acted alone, but subtle cues, evasive statements, and unexplained absences during the months leading up to Lila's disappearance led detectives to reopen certain leads. Every friend, acquaintance, and coworker of Duval from 2002 and 2003 was scrutinized. Background checks, phone records, and old photographs were analyzed, revealing subtle patterns of interaction and proximity that raised uncomfortable questions. Simultaneously, the forensic team conducted additional DNA analysis on evidence collected from the shed where Lila's remains had been found. This yielded trace material, confirming her identity and corroborating Duval's account. Yet, the process also revealed minor anomalies, small biological traces that could suggest the presence of another individual. The revelation reignited a flurry of activity within the cold case unit, now balancing closure with the need to explore lingering uncertainties. For the Montgomery family, the emotions were intense and complex. Julia found herself revisiting decades of memories, her daughter's laugh, her sketches, the smell of her hair, the quiet evenings spent discussing dreams. Pain and relief intermingled, creating a surreal sense of finality mixed with ongoing grief. The family worked closely with victim support organizations, participating in counseling and public forums to help others facing similar experiences. Lila's younger brother, 14 at the time of her disappearance, now a young man, found solace in being part of the closure process, confronting the fear that had shadowed his adolescence. Riverbend, meanwhile, faced its own reckoning. Town meetings were convened to discuss community safety, the lingering trauma, and the lessons to be learned from the prolonged investigation. Residents shared stories of fear and resilience, of evenings spent worrying for children, and of the quiet courage that had kept hope alive. The arrest, while shocking, reinforced the critical role of vigilance and collective responsibility. As the trial approached, more details surfaced from Duval's confession. He admitted to planning the abduction with precision, tracking Lila's routines and manipulating situations to isolate her from the public. The meticulousness was horrifying, and the revelation sent ripples through the community, prompting conversations about the unseen dangers lurking even in familiar places. The psychological evaluation conducted on Duval painted a portrait of a man with obsessive tendencies and a distorted moral compass, yet entirely capable of deception and manipulation. The courtroom proceedings were intense. Prosecutors presented a combination of DNA evidence, forensic reconstructions, and testimony from law enforcement detailing the investigation's evolution over nearly 2 decades. Witnesses recounted moments that, in retrospect, were sinister but had gone unnoticed. Duval's presence near the bus stop, his attendance at school events, his casual interactions with Lila and her friends. Each revelation reinforced the gravity of the crimes and the courage required to pursue justice after such a prolonged period. Throughout, Julia Montgomery remained composed, though her eyes betrayed the pain and anger she had carried for 19 years. She listened as prosecutors laid out every detail of Lila's final hours, every small choice Duval had made to conceal his actions. The courtroom was silent at moments, broken only by the soft sobs of those who had followed the case for years. But there was also a palpable sense of triumph. Justice, though delayed, was arriving with undeniable force. The twists continued to unfold. Investigators discovered old letters and journals belonging to Duval, some of which hinted at preoccupation with other young women in the area. While no additional charges were immediately filed, these documents provided insight into his mindset and sparked a broader discussion about the potential for overlooked victims. Riverbend's residents, while relieved by the arrest, now faced a new understanding of the layers of secrecy that had existed alongside their community for years. By the end of Part 2, the town had experienced a full spectrum of emotions: shock, grief, anger, and relief. The arrest had been swift, the confession compelling, and the forensic evidence undeniable. Yet, questions lingered, and the emotional impact of the crime and the prolonged investigation would resonate for years. The Montgomery family, along with the Riverbend community, had endured nearly 2 decades of uncertainty and fear. But with the revelation of the truth, they were finally beginning to reclaim a sense of peace. Lila Montgomery's memory was honored in ways both public and private. A mural depicting her smiling face and love for art was unveiled near the diner, and scholarship funds were established in her name for young artists in Riverbend. Candlelight vigils continued, now marked not only by grief, but also by triumph, resilience, and the undeniable proof that persistence and hope can illuminate even the darkest mysteries. And yet, the final chapter was still unfolding. The courtroom, the forensic revelations, and the lingering questions about Duval's potential accomplices ensured that the town remained vigilant. The journey toward complete closure would continue, but for the first time in nearly 20 years, Lila's story had a tangible resolution, a testament to the unwavering determination of her family, the dedication of law enforcement, and the power of modern forensic science to rewrite the narrative of a small town haunted by loss. The trial began in late summer, nearly 20 years after Lila Montgomery vanished. Riverbend's courthouse, small and sun-bleached, was overflowing with residents who had followed the story for decades. Journalists, photographers, and TV crews jostled for position, their cameras capturing every reaction. Julia Montgomery arrived early, flanked by her husband and Lila's younger brother, now a young man determined to see justice through. Every step she took down the courthouse steps was heavy with memories of birthdays missed, milestones Lila never reached, and nights spent wondering if she would ever return. The prosecution opened with a chilling yet compelling narrative. They recounted the events of that fateful August evening in 2003, from Lila's last steps near the diner to the painstaking investigation that had endured for nearly 2 decades. They presented the DNA evidence recovered from the shed where her body had been found, meticulously matching it to Duval. Every piece of forensic evidence, the trace fibers, the recovered items, and the lingering biological matter, was laid bare for the courtroom to see. It was methodical, precise, and devastatingly effective. Witness after witness took the stand. Former classmates described Lila as bright, kind-hearted, and full of dreams, their voices wavering as they recounted memories of laughter and innocence. Detectives walked through the painstaking reconstruction of the crime, detailing Duval's movements and the small mistakes that had eventually led to his capture. Each testimony added weight, creating a timeline impossible to dispute. Duval's defense was a mix of denial and feigned ignorance. He claimed that he had only meant to scare Lila, insisting that the events had spiraled beyond his control. He denied any planning, any malicious intent. But as cross-examination unfolded, the gaps in his story became apparent. Forensic experts challenged his claims, pointing out inconsistencies in his recollection and the undeniable fact that he had deliberately concealed evidence for years. Julia Montgomery sat quietly as the testimony unfolded, her hands clenched in her lap. Every detail, every revelation was painful, yet it also confirmed what she had always known, that the person responsible for her daughter's death had been hiding in plain sight, weaving lies into the fabric of the community for years. Her heart ached with sorrow, but it also burned with resolve. After nearly 2 decades, the truth had emerged. Then came the unexpected twist, evidence that no one had anticipated. During the trial, investigators revealed that Duval had kept a hidden journal, meticulously chronicling his obsessions, his planning, and his own sense of power over Lila. The entries were disturbing, detailing moments of surveillance, strategies to isolate her, and fantasies that escalated over time. The courtroom was silent as excerpts were read aloud, painting a horrifying portrait of manipulation and obsession. This revelation stunned the community and underscored the calculated nature of his crime. But another twist emerged from the forensic evidence. Small traces of DNA were discovered that didn't match Duval, suggesting that someone else may have been present at the scene. While the investigation continued to determine whether this indicated an accomplice or contamination, it cast a new shadow over a case many had assumed was fully understood. The prosecutors addressed the court directly, emphasizing that Duval's confession and the evidence against him were sufficient for conviction, while acknowledging that questions still lingered. Throughout the trial, the courtroom was heavy with emotion. Friends, neighbors, and family members who had endured nearly 2 decades of uncertainty sat in quiet anticipation. Tears flowed freely, and some whispered words of comfort to one another. For the Montgomery family, it was a surreal experience, painful, but also cathartic. Each testimony, each piece of evidence, was a step toward reclaiming the life stolen from them and honoring Lila's memory. After 2 weeks of testimony, the case moved to closing arguments. Prosecutors spoke with measured intensity, reiterating the evidence, the confession, and the meticulous reconstruction of events. They reminded the jury that while the town had waited decades, the commitment to justice had never wavered. Duval's defense team, in contrast, appealed to doubt, questioning the accuracy of memory and the passage of time. Yet the weight of the evidence, combined with his own admissions, left little room for ambiguity. The jury deliberated for 5 hours, a tense stretch for a community long accustomed to uncertainty. When they finally returned, the courtroom held its collective breath. The foreperson stood and delivered the verdict, guilty on all counts. Gasps and tears filled the room. Julia Montgomery collapsed into the arms of her husband, relief washing over her even as sorrow lingered. Lila's younger brother, eyes brimming with tears, whispered his gratitude to his mother, the weight of years finally lifting from their shoulders. Duval's sentencing was equally somber. The judge, acknowledging the calculated cruelty and premeditation, sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The courtroom, once filled with tension and dread, now echoed with a quiet sense of justice fulfilled. For the first time in nearly 20 years, Riverbend could breathe, knowing that the person responsible for Lila's death would never harm anyone again. But the story did not end with the verdict. In the weeks that followed, the community began the slow process of healing. Riverbend organized memorial events in Lila's honor, celebrating her life and resilience. Julia Montgomery worked with local organizations to establish scholarships for young women pursuing education and the arts, ensuring that Lila's legacy would continue to inspire and empower. The town, though forever changed, began to reclaim a sense of normalcy, united in remembrance and vigilance. The twists and turns of the case left a lasting impact on law enforcement as well. Detectives involved in the investigation reflected on the role of persistence, modern forensic technology, and the importance of never dismissing old leads. The case became a teaching moment for new officers, illustrating how patience, careful attention to detail, and collaboration can ultimately break even the coldest of cases. For Julia Montgomery, the journey was deeply personal. She continued to visit the mural dedicated to her daughter, leaving flowers, letters, and sketches. She spoke at schools and community events, sharing Lila's story, the dangers of obsessive behavior, and the importance of vigilance. Her advocacy became a source of healing, transforming grief into action and pain into purpose. Even as the town celebrated the resolution, questions about the lingering DNA traces remained. Law enforcement continued to investigate, cautious but determined. While Duval's conviction brought justice, the possibility of unseen accomplices or overlooked details reminded Riverbend that vigilance is never complete. Still, the community could rest knowing that the main thread of the mystery, the person who had stolen Lila's life, had been unmasked and held accountable. The final months of the case also revealed smaller, quieter victories. Neighbors who had once feared speaking up found strength in the collective experience. Families came together, rekindling relationships strained by suspicion and fear. Riverbend's police department implemented new protocols for cold cases, inspired by the lessons learned from Lila's story. What began as an unspeakable tragedy had sparked systemic improvements, ensuring that future generations would benefit from the knowledge gained through pain and perseverance. And through it all, Lila's presence lingered. Her friends recalled her laughter, her artistic talent, and her dreams. Her teachers remembered her curiosity, intelligence, and kindness. Through memorials, scholarships, and community events, her life, though tragically cut short, continued to leave an imprint on the town she had once called home. In the end, the case of Lila Montgomery served as a reminder of resilience, hope, and the relentless pursuit of truth. A small town, haunted for 19 years, finally reclaimed its peace. A family, fractured by loss, found a measure of closure. And a young girl whose life was stolen too soon was remembered, not for the darkness that ended her days, but for the light she had brought into the world. The arrest, confession, trial, and conviction all marked a journey that spanned decades, but in the hearts of those who loved her, justice had finally arrived. Lila's story became a beacon, a testament to the power of persistence, the importance of community, and the enduring human capacity to seek truth, even in the darkest corners of life.